The moment I saw that Rolls-Royce pull into our suburban driveway, something in my chest twisted tight. It was midnight blue, pristine, with leather seats that probably cost more than my annual salary. And it belonged to Marcus Williams, the black man from 3 blocks over who'd been getting increasingly friendly with my daughter lately. I didn't think. I just grabbed my phone, stepped out onto the porch in my bathrobe, and dialed 911. "A suspicious vehicle just pulled into my neighborhood," I told the dispatcher, my voice steady, authoritative. "It's parked outside a residence. I don't recognize it. Could be stolen. The driver is a black male, possibly in his 30s. I want to be safe." The operator took my address, assured me help was on the way, and I hung up feeling like I'd done the right thing. My daughter was 16. This man, Marcus, had been hanging around too much, texting her, picking her up after school in that ridiculous car. I'd looked him up online once. No legitimate job listed. So where was the money coming from? But that was before I understood who Marcus really was. Before the police arrived. Before everything I'd built crumbled in a single afternoon. Let me back up. Let me tell you what my life looked like before that night, because you need to understand how wrong I was about everything. My name is Ashley Mitchell, and I lived what I thought was the perfect suburban existence. Our house sat on Maple Drive in Riverside Heights, a quiet, predominantly white neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business, which was exactly how I liked it. The neighborhood watch was my domain. I'd organized it 3 years ago, and I took that responsibility seriously. Safety, community standards, protecting property values, these were the things that mattered to me. The house itself was a 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch and a white picket fence that I had repainted every other summer. Inside, everything was coordinated. Cream-colored walls, dark wood furniture, family photos in matching frames on the mantelpiece. My husband, David, was a financial analyst at Mercer & Associates downtown. He left at 7 in the morning and returned at 6, kissing me on the cheek as he loosened his tie. We'd been married 19 years. We had 2 children, Jennifer, 22, away at college in Boston, and Tyler, 16, who was supposed to be at home doing his homework and staying out of trouble. Except it was his sister. Tyler was actually my daughter. I called her Tyler because I'd wanted a son, and by the time I realized the ultrasound tech had made a mistake, I'd already fallen in love with the name. David used to laugh about it. Not anymore. Tyler had always been the difficult child. Artistic, restless, questioning everything. While Jennifer had sailed through high school with a 4.0 GPA and a clear trajectory toward law school, Tyler dyed her hair, wore clothes that made me uncomfortable, and spent too much time on her phone. I'd done everything right as a mother: organic snacks, educational summer camps, therapy when she went through that phase in 8th grade. But there was something about her that I could never quite control, and that terrified me. The morning of that terrible night, everything seemed normal. I woke at 6, as I always did, and went downstairs to brew the coffee. The kitchen was my sanctuary: stainless steel appliances, granite countertops, the morning light streaming through the window above the sink. I stood there for a moment, holding the empty pot, watching the frost on the backyard grass begin to melt under the early September sun. Somewhere in the house, I could hear David in the shower. Tyler was still asleep upstairs. The day stretched ahead, predictable and manageable. David came down at 6:40, hair still damp, already frowning at his phone. He was a good-looking man in that way that financial success makes men handsome: expensive haircut, well-fitted suits, the confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about money. His father had put him through Princeton. His father's connections had gotten him the job at Mercer. His father's money had paid the down payment on our house. David didn't talk about his advantages much. He seemed to assume everyone had them. "Did you see that email from the HOA?" he asked, sitting down at the kitchen island with his espresso. "Not yet. What is it?" "Some complaint about the Johnsons' mailbox. Apparently it's not regulation height." I made a mental note. The neighborhood watch was technically separate from the HOA, but I liked to stay informed. Standard slipping was how neighborhoods declined. I'd seen it happen to other suburbs. One broken window, one badly maintained lawn, and suddenly property values nosedived and the wrong sort of people moved in. "I'll look into it," I said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "How was your evening? You were late getting home." Client dinner. Nothing exciting. He didn't look up from his phone. What about you? How was your day? It was a reflex question. He wasn't really asking. I didn't really answer. I talked about the book club meeting scheduled for Thursday, about needing to pick up groceries, about the fact that Tyler's grades seemed to be slipping in English. David nodded in the right places and drank his espresso. By 6:55, he was kissing me goodbye and heading out the door. I stood in the window and watched his silver BMW pull out of the driveway, then turned back to the quiet kitchen. This was my favorite part of the day, the hour before Tyler woke up, when the house was entirely mine, when I could think clearly. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and sat down with my laptop at the kitchen island. The neighborhood Facebook group had 3 new posts. Someone asking about yard service recommendations, someone else complaining about a delivery truck that had partially blocked their driveway, and then, at the bottom, a post from Linda Chen, one of the newer residents on the street. "Has anyone else noticed the vehicle that keeps parking on Hickory Road?" Linda had written at 11:47 p.m. "Nice car, but I've seen it there late at night. Just wondering if anyone knows whose it is." There were already 8 comments. Most were variations of concern. "Probably just a friend visiting," someone had written. But Linda had replied, "At midnight? On a school night? Just seems odd." I should have left it alone, I know that now. But I didn't. Instead, I typed, "I've noticed it too. Which vehicle are you referring to? Blue Rolls-Royce?" And I hit send. Linda's response came within minutes. "Yes, exactly that one. Do you know whose it is?" I didn't, but I could have found out. I could have knocked on the door of whoever had driven that car into our neighborhood and asked them directly. I could have assumed they had a legitimate reason for being here. I could have minded my own business. Instead, I opened my phone's browser and typed into Google, "Rolls-Royce Riverside Heights blue luxury car owner." Nothing came up. So I tried the neighborhood Facebook group's archived posts. Nothing there either. And that's when something shifted in me, a small but distinct hardening, like cement beginning to set. At 7:30, I heard Tyler padding downstairs. She was still in her pajamas, hair in a messy bun, eyes half closed. She grabbed a bowl from the cabinet and poured cereal into it without greeting me. This was typical. In the mornings, Tyler existed in her own world. "You have a good day at school?" I asked, the question automatic. "Fine," she said, adding milk. "Your English grade is still not where it should be." She shrugged. "It's fine. It's a B-. You're capable of an A." She sat down at the island, several stools away from where I was sitting, and began eating without responding. This was the distance that had grown between us, not dramatic or loud, but persistent. A quiet gap that I kept trying to bridge, and she kept widening. "Are you going to Sarah's house after school?" I asked, already knowing she wasn't. I knew her schedule better than she did. I had access to her location via her phone. I told myself it was for safety, a mother's prerogative. "No, I'm coming straight home." "Good, we can work on your English essay." She didn't respond, just continued eating, her eyes fixed on her cereal bowl like it might contain the secrets of the universe. I watched her for a moment longer, feeling that familiar frustration. She was 16 years old. She had every advantage. And yet she seemed determined to squander it all, to throw away the life I'd worked so hard to create for her. By that evening, I still hadn't found out who owned the Rolls-Royce. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I made dinner, chicken piccata, a recipe from the Williams-Sonoma cookbook, and set the table for 3. David came home at 6, Tyler at 6:30, and we sat down together in the dining room. The only sounds were the clink of silverware on porcelain and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "How was work?" I asked David. "Good. Closed a major portfolio restructuring. Should bring in about $3 million in AUM. I nodded as if I understood what that meant. After 19 years of marriage, I still couldn't quite grasp what David actually did all day. Something about money. Managing other people's money. It was successful and important, and that was enough. "Tyler, you have any assignments tonight?" I asked. "Just the English essay. I can help you with that after dinner." "I've got it," she said, a little too quickly. But when I stood up to clear the dishes, Tyler disappeared upstairs to her room, and I heard her door close softly. I didn't follow her. Instead, I cleaned up, loaded the dishwasher, and returned to my laptop in the kitchen. The Rolls-Royce was still on my mind. It was almost like an itch I couldn't scratch. I tried different searches. I called Linda Chen, who admitted she hadn't been able to figure out anything either. "It's probably nothing," she said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe that any more than I did. At 9 o'clock, I got a notification on my phone. It was from Tyler's location app. She was on the move. Not heading toward Sarah's house, but toward the commercial district downtown. I clicked on the map and zoomed in. She was on Riverside Boulevard, near the shopping center. My heart did a funny thing. A skip, almost. She'd told me she was going to be at home doing her essay. I said nothing to David. He was already in bed, asleep or close to it. Instead, I went upstairs to Tyler's room and knocked on her door. "Yeah?" she called from inside. I opened the door without waiting for an actual invitation. Her bed was piled with pillows arranged to look like a sleeping body. Her desk lamp was on, casting light across her empty desk. And the window that looked out onto the garage roof, was open. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty bed, at the arranged pillows, at the open window. Then I looked at my phone, at the blue dot that showed my daughter's location on Riverside Boulevard, and something cold settled into my stomach. This was the beginning. This was the moment when I should have asked myself what was really going on. This was the moment when I should have realized that I didn't know my daughter at all. But instead, I closed the window, smoothed out the pillows, and went back downstairs. I sat in the dark living room and watched the blue dot on my phone move slowly along Riverside Boulevard. It stopped for 45 minutes. Then it began moving back toward home. At 11:30 p.m., I heard a car door close outside. I went to the window and saw Tyler climbing back through her bedroom window. And in the driveway, parked under the streetlight, sat the midnight blue Rolls-Royce. That's when I made the call to the police. The final reckoning. The police arrived at 11:47 p.m. 2 cruisers, lights off, moving quietly into our neighborhood like they were hunting something dangerous. I watched from my living room window as the officers approached the Rolls-Royce. Marcus had already seen them coming. He stepped out of the car with his hands visible, calm and composed in a way that made my stomach twist. He wasn't acting like a man with something to hide. He was acting like a man who'd been expecting this. I don't remember making the decision to go outside. One moment I was standing in the darkened living room, phone in hand, and the next I was on the porch in my bathrobe, watching as an officer asked Marcus for his license and registration. The night air was cool against my skin. From somewhere upstairs I could hear David stirring. He'd been asleep when I made the call. "Ma'am," one of the officers noticed me. "You made the call?" "Yes," I said, stepping forward. "I saw this vehicle here late at night. I didn't recognize it. I was concerned about my daughter's safety." Marcus turned to look at me then. Our eyes met across the driveway, and something in his expression shifted. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. Disappointment, maybe. Or recognition. Like he'd been waiting to see if I would do exactly this, and now I had. "The vehicle is registered to you?" the officer asked Marcus, examining his license. "It is," Marcus said quietly. "I own the car. I was here to pick up a friend." "A friend," I repeated, the words tasting like poison. "My 16-year-old daughter." "Your daughter invited me," Marcus said, still calm. "She asked me to pick her up. She's in the car." The officer's expression shifted. He looked at me, then back at Marcus. "Sir, is there a problem here? Has this young woman asked you to leave?" "No," Marcus said. "There's no problem. But I think there's been a misunderstanding." That's when David appeared on the porch, still in his pajamas, confused and angry. "What the hell is going on? Why are the police here?" "Your wife called them," one of the officers said. "Reported a suspicious vehicle. Now we're trying to sort out what's actually happening." The officer walked back to the Rolls-Royce and opened the passenger door. Tyler climbed out slowly, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red from crying. When she saw me, her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, pure rage, mixed with something that looked like pity. "Tell them," she said to Marcus. "Tell them what you actually do." Marcus nodded once, as if he'd been waiting for permission. He pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, showing the officer the screen. "I'm a software engineer," he said. "I work for a fintech startup downtown. The car is paid for. Everything is legitimate." "That doesn't prove anything," I said, my voice shaking. "You could have gotten the money illegally. You could be—" "I could be a lot of things," Marcus interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "But I'm not. And you know what? That was never the real problem, was it, Ashley?" Hearing my name in his mouth, said with that edge of contempt, made me flinch. "The real problem is that you decided who I was before you ever met me," Marcus continued. "You saw a black man in an expensive car in your white neighborhood, and you didn't think. You just called the police. You didn't ask Tyler where she was going. You didn't ask me who I was. You made assumptions, and then you tried to destroy my life based on those assumptions." David put his hand on my shoulder, but I shook it off. "She's 16. She lied to me. She snuck out. That's what matters here." "You're right," Tyler said, her voice cold. "I lied. I snuck out. And you know why? Because you made it clear that you didn't trust my judgment, that you didn't trust me. So I stopped trying to earn that trust and just did what I wanted anyway." "Tyler, get inside," David said, his voice taking on that commanding tone he used in the boardroom. "No," Tyler said. "I'm not going inside. I'm going to finish what I came here to say." She turned to me, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Marcus asked me out 2 months ago. He's been nothing but respectful and kind. He drives me places because he has a car and he likes spending time with me. That's it. That's the whole story. But you couldn't even ask. You couldn't even give me the benefit of the doubt. You just called the police on a black man because he had a nice car and was spending time with me." The officer cleared his throat. "Well, it seems like there's been a misunderstanding here. Sir, you're free to go. There's nothing criminal happening." Marcus nodded, but he didn't move toward the car. Instead, he looked directly at me. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly. "It's not that you called the police. It's that you were so sure of yourself. You didn't hesitate. You didn't question your own assumptions. You just acted on them. Consequences be damned." "I was protecting my daughter," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. "No," Marcus said. "You were protecting your idea of who should be in your neighborhood, who should be dating your daughter, who deserves the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't. That's not protection. That's control." The officers left shortly after that, their presence no longer needed. Marcus drove away with Tyler in the passenger seat, and I stood on the porch in my bathrobe, watching the red taillights disappear into the darkness. David had gone back inside. I was alone with my reflection in the dark window. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, staring at nothing, replaying every moment of the evening. The moment I'd called 911, the moment Marcus had stepped out of with his hands visible, the moment Tyler had looked at me with that expression of betrayal and disappointment. Sometime around 4 in the morning, I did something I should have done hours earlier. I opened my laptop and I researched. I found Marcus Williams' LinkedIn profile, software engineer at Meridian Technologies, a company I'd never heard of but which appeared to be legitimate and successful. His profile showed education at Stanford. His work history showed a clear trajectory of advancement and achievement. Everything about him suggested exactly what he'd claimed: a successful, intelligent, hard-working man. I also found his social media. His Instagram showed photos of him volunteering at a youth coding program in the city. His Twitter had posts about tech innovation and social justice. Everything about him suggested a thoughtful, engaged person who cared about his community. I had called the police on this man based entirely on the color of his skin and the model of his car. The realization didn't hit me like a shock. It settled over me slowly, like cold rain, soaking deeper and deeper into my consciousness until I was shivering. I'd spent 19 years telling myself I was a good person, a responsible mother, a woman who cared about her community. And in a single moment of panic and prejudice, I'd revealed the lie at the core of all that. Tyler didn't come home that night. She texted David at 6 in the morning. "I'm staying at Sarah's. I don't want to talk to you right now." She was referring to both of us, I knew. Both of her parents who had failed her in different ways. David with his absence, me with my control. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to Meridian Technologies downtown and I waited in the parking lot. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Apologize? Demand an explanation? Somehow undo the previous night? Marcus came out at 5 o'clock, walking toward the parking lot. When he saw my car, he stopped for a moment, then kept walking. I got out of my car and stepped directly into his path. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all I had. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. "Are you?" he asked. "Or are you just sorry you got caught?" "I'm sorry for what I did," I said. "I'm sorry for calling the police. I'm sorry for assuming—" "For assuming what?" Marcus interrupted. "That I was dangerous because I'm black? That I couldn't possibly own a nice car? That I had no right to be in your neighborhood?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. There was no good answer to that question. "I've been called the police on before," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Once for being in the wrong neighborhood. Once for being in my own car. Once for jogging at dusk. Every single time it was because of how I look. So no, I don't accept your apology, Ashley. Not because you didn't mean it, but because meaning it isn't enough. You can't unring this bell. You can't take back the assumption. You can't undo the fear you created in your daughter's life." "What can I do?" I asked, and I was crying now, tears streaming down my face. "You can examine why you made that choice," Marcus said. "You can ask yourself what it says about you that your first instinct was to call the police. And then you can do the hard work of changing that instinct. But that's not something I can help you with. That's something you have to do yourself." He walked around me to his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the parking lot in my work clothes, mascara running down my face. The next week was the hardest week of my life. Tyler came home but refused to speak to me beyond polite necessities. "Pass the salt. I have a project at school. I'm going to bed." Short, clipped sentences that cut deeper than any argument could have. David suggested we go to family therapy. I agreed, thinking it might help bridge the gap with Tyler. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, who had a calm manner and an unsettling ability to ask questions that made me squirm. "Tell me about the night you called the police," she said during our first session. I recounted the events, leaving nothing out. Tyler stared at her hands the entire time. David looked at the wall. When I finished, Dr. Chen was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Ashley, when you saw the Rolls-Royce, what was your first thought?" "That it was suspicious," I said. "That it didn't belong in the neighborhood." "Why?" "Because it wasn't a car I recognized." "Is that the real reason?" Dr. Chen asked gently. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes and move on. But something in the room made me tell the truth. "No," I whispered. "Because of who was driving it." "And who was that?" "A black man." The words hung in the air like something poisonous. "How did that make you feel?" Dr. Chen asked. "Afraid," I said. "I felt afraid." "Of what?" "Of what he might do. Of who he might be. Of—" I stopped, unable to finish the thought. "Of what danger he represented to your daughter?" Dr. Chen finished for me. I nodded, and that's when Tyler spoke for the first time in days. "He wasn't a danger," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "He was kind to me. He listened to me. He treated me with respect. And you tried to destroy him because you were afraid of the color of his skin." "Tyler," I started, but she cut me off. "I've been thinking about something," she continued. "All my life you've taught me to be careful, to be aware of danger, to trust my instincts. But my instincts about Marcus were good. I felt safe with him. I felt heard. And you told me I was wrong. You told me my judgment was bad. You told me I couldn't trust myself. And when I did trust myself, you called the police on him. I was trying to protect you," I said, the same defense I'd been using all week. "From what?" Tyler asked. "From a kind man who drives a nice car? Or from the possibility that my mother might be wrong about something?" Dr. Chen didn't say anything. She just let us sit in that silence. Over the following months, things changed slowly. Tyler continued to see Marcus, and I made a conscious effort to get to know him properly. I invited him to dinner. David was skeptical, but he came around. I learned about his work, his family, his dreams. Everything I should have learned before I called the police on him. But the relationship between me and Tyler had been fundamentally altered. She was polite to me, but the closeness we'd had before was gone. The trust was gone. I'd become the thing I'd always feared most, a person my daughter couldn't fully trust, couldn't fully confide in. I also made changes in the neighborhood watch. I stepped down from my leadership position and suggested we focus on actual safety issues, broken streetlights, pedestrian safety, community resources, rather than on suspicious activity defined by subjective fear. Some of the other members disagreed and left the group. Others stayed and helped reshape it into something better. Linda Chen, the woman who'd first posted about the Rolls-Royce, actually became one of my closest allies in this effort. She told me one day that she'd felt terrible about her initial post, that she'd also made assumptions based on stereotypes. We started a reading group focused on racial justice and implicit bias. It was uncomfortable and challenging, but it was necessary. A year after that night, I ran into Marcus at a coffee shop downtown. He was alone, waiting for his order. "Hi," I said, uncertain. "Ashley," he said, acknowledging me with a nod. "I wanted to thank you," I said, "for what you said that day in the parking lot, for holding me accountable. It's been a hard year, but it's been necessary." Marcus studied me for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said. "I do, but I want to be clear. I didn't do that for you. I did it because I was angry, and because I needed you to understand what you'd done. Whether you changed or not was never my responsibility." "I know," I said, "but I changed anyway, and I'm grateful you gave me the chance to see what I needed to change." He nodded, and there was a slight softening in his expression. "How's Tyler?" "Good," I said. "She's applying to colleges. She's thinking about studying social work. She wants to help people." "That's good," Marcus said. "She's a good person. I hope she stays that way." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something closer to understanding. As I drove home that day, I thought about the night I'd called the police. I thought about the fear I'd felt, and how that fear had been rooted in something deeper than concern for my daughter's safety. It had been rooted in a lifetime of assumptions, of stereotypes, of the comfortable certainty that people like me, white, suburban, financially secure, had the right to decide who belonged in our spaces and who didn't. I would never fully undo that night. The memory of it would stay with me forever, a permanent reminder of who I was capable of being when I stopped thinking and started reacting. But maybe that was the point. Maybe we all needed reminders like that, uncomfortable truths about ourselves that we couldn't ignore or rationalize away. Tyler graduated high school that spring. She gave a speech at the ceremony about trust and judgment, about the dangers of assumption and the courage required to question our own biases. She didn't mention me or that night directly, but I knew she was speaking to me. The auditorium was full, and when she finished, everyone stood and applauded. I stood too, tears streaming down my face, finally understanding what it meant to be truly proud of my daughter, not for her achievements or her potential, but for her integrity and her willingness to hold people accountable, including me. That fall, Tyler left for college at UC Berkeley. She studied social work and criminal justice reform. She called me every Sunday, and we talked about her classes, her friends, her life. The distance between us had closed somewhat, but it would never be the same as it had been before. Some breaks, once made, never fully heal. A few years later, I saw Marcus at a tech conference where I was working as a volunteer. He was giving a talk about diversity in the tech industry. After his presentation, I approached him. "That was a powerful speech," I said. "Thank you," he replied. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," I said. "About that night. And I wanted you to know that it changed me. Not to absolve myself, but, to be honest, it was the moment I realized I needed to change." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad," he said finally. "Not for my sake, but for the sake of everyone else whose life you might have destroyed if you hadn't changed. Because you would have. You would have called the police on someone else. Maybe not the next time, but eventually." "I know," I said, "and I'm ashamed of that." "Good," Marcus said. "You should be. But shame without action is just self-pity. The fact that you acted, that you did the work to change, that matters." It was the closest thing to forgiveness I would ever get from him, and it was enough. Years later, when I was much older and had learned to sit with my mistakes without drowning in them, I realized that the Rolls-Royce had been the symbol of my own blindness. It had seemed to me like a threat, an anomaly, something that didn't belong. But it had belonged all along. It had just belonged to someone I'd decided didn't deserve to be in my neighborhood, someone I'd judged before I'd ever met him. The car had been perfect all along. It was my vision that had been broken.